always start these is to give everyone a kind of rundown of how it is that you got into photography. So when did you first pick up a camera and why?
Well, I first picked up a camera 5 years ago. I came to it a little bit late. I was already 42 when I did that. The reason I got a camera was because my kids are growing up. They were 8 and 10 at the time. And I was just kind of lamenting the fact that all of my pictures of them were taken with my phone. And I wanted to have, just a nicer set of pictures of the kids. So I got a camera, just got a little crop sensor, a Nikon D5200, with no great intentions of becoming a photographer or anything, just really to capture the kids. But what I found was, once I got the camera, I just absolutely loved it, and I just couldn't stop taking photos. And it kind of developed from there. I was using the thing all the time. A few months after I got the digital camera, I decided to get a film camera. Just from looking at photographs online and stuff like that, stuff that I liked, and seeing that I really liked the way that film looked. So I got an old film camera on eBay for $30. And never really looked back from there. It's just kind of mushroomed from that initial beginning.
Did you find the transition, obviously, because you did it quite early, I feel like maybe it was probably a bit more fluid, but the transition from digital over to film, was that quite easy?
It was. I mean, I'm actually glad that I started on digital, because that helped me learn, how, ISO and shutter speed and aperture and so on work. So by the time I got a film camera, I'd already, figured all of that out. So I kind of was able to hit the ground running with the film camera. And actually, I think that it was, starting film so early in my experience as a photographer was really helpful, because it forces you to kind of understand what you're doing a little bit more, shooting in manual with the film camera. So it kind of gave me a little bit of a boost as well. So it was a smooth and easy transition for me.
And as I said before we got started, I'm someone that has struggled to find too many people that photograph portraits on film. It seems to be something that's kind of been lost in the mix to a lot of the other kind of cliches of film photography. What was it that made you go from photographing the family to photographing portraits in general?
Well, when I first started, I wasn't even just focused on portraits. I was literally taking pictures of everything. I mean, I was out in the backyard with a macro lens, taking pictures of spiders. I was out at night taking pictures of the stars. I was doing just all kinds of photography. I would take my camera with me to work, and then on my lunch break, I would go and have a walk around downtown Los Angeles and just, photograph stuff in the street. I didn't really have any focus to begin with. And the way that the portrait thing started was that I was taking portraits of the kids, obviously, from the get-go. And I actually got ill with flu and was kind of bored sitting in bed, waiting to get better. And I started an Instagram account just really out of, needed something to do that I could do while I was housebound. And
right.
And I posted a variety of pictures on my Instagram account. And what happened from that was that I started to have people contact me and ask me if I would shoot their portraits, because they liked the pictures of the kids that I had posted. And it really kind of grew from there. And I started to specialize in portraits from that point on. And I still do other kinds of photography. I enjoy street photography, although I don't think I'm especially good at it, but I enjoy it. But I really got into portraits. And I think that, for me personally, at least, the way that film portraits look is, to my eye, more pleasing than what I've been able to accomplish with digital. So I've really focused on film portraits. And then once I got into medium format, which I did probably within a year of getting a 35mm film camera, then that takes it to a whole new level. And I've really just sustain my hobby. I only do this as a hobby. It's not a profession. By people seeing my work on Instagram and asking me to take their photos, which I'm always very happy to do.
One thing I've noticed with stalking you a little bit on Instagram is that you seem to quite often use Ektar for portraits, whereas I think like people think the standard is that you have to go for Portra 400 or 160 or whatever. And I actually really like the look of Ektar in general. And I've enjoyed quite a lot of portraiture work I've seen done on Ektar. Why is it in particular that you go for Ektar when you do?
Well, I think it's a really good question. And I think that the problem with portrait is that obviously it's a very nice film and I shoot a lot with portrait, but it works well with certain skin tones and not quite so well with others, and also with certain kinds of light and not so well with other kinds of light. And so what I do a lot is if I'm shooting a very pale skinned model, I'm not going to use Ektar because it brings out too much redness in the skin tones. And I'm not one who goes into Lightroom and does a lot of editing. So I kind of, the way that I work, I'm kind of stuck with whatever the film looks like. So I avoid it for very pale models. But I think with any model that has darker skin and, and black models in particular look wonderful when they're shot with Ektar. And so I really enjoy using it. And also because we have so much light here in California where I live, it enables me to shoot at wider apertures, when there's a lot of light around. So I appreciate that, the slow speed of the film as well as compared to, say, Portra 400. But yeah, I really like the way Ektar looks, and I don't really understand why more people don't use it for portraits, because I think it's a wonderful film when you use it that way.
I mean, I never have. I'm only new into photographing people with film, but from the evidence that I've seen from yourself and a couple of others, I also can't quite understand why it's being ignored, other than for the sake of maybe a little bit of groupthink and people sticking to what is approved by sort of the group or the community in general. One question I do have for you, obviously, like you just mentioned, you're based in California. Obviously, color and the abundance of light is a really big deal in California. So how do you come to the decision when you're going to shoot black and white?
That's a good question. And I don't know if I can really give you a complete answer to that. I don't fully understand myself sometimes where I choose black and white film. I usually take at least one roll of black and white with me on a shoot so that I can include some black and white shooting in the film. One reason that I do it, which is a very practical reason, is if I shoot indoors, I only shoot with natural light. So if I'm working indoors with, say, window light, the light levels are a little lower, then I just appreciate the fact that I can push the black and white film, and it enables me to shoot in a lower light environment where, color film might not be so useful. But I think that, but I also enjoy the way that, black and white kind of reduces the elements of the photograph. It makes you focus much more simply on light and shadow. And so, I don't know if my black and white photography is as good as my color photography. I can never really decide. I think I actually prefer working with color, and I generally do work with color. But I do occasionally take a black and white photo that I really like, although I wouldn't really think of myself, primarily as a black and white photographer. And then the other advantage, of course, of black and white is that it's easy to develop. So I develop my own at home, and I actually really enjoy the developing process and the opportunity that it gives you to kind of add a little bit more to the creative process by choosing how you develop the film to accomplish, a certain level of contrast or grain or those other attributes that you can add to the image by developing it a particular way.
And in terms of your shoots, what sort of level of planning is going in before you head out to shoot? Are you an improviser, or are you someone that likes to really know the details of what you're going to do?
Yeah, I'm not an improviser at all. It's like it's meticulously planned. So that begins with really whenever I'm out and about in the city, or if I'm out hiking in the mountains, because we have mountains right here in Los Angeles. It's like literally in the city we have a mountain range that runs through the city. And I'm lucky to live only about 10 minutes away from the mountains. But whenever I'm out and about, I've always got an eye, half an eye open to potential locations. So I start thinking about it at that point, picking out potential locations where it might be, might be a nice place for a photo shoot. And then I will visit those places at, particular times of day. I tend to shoot during golden hour, so either early morning or late afternoon. And I'll visit them at those times of day to see how the light falls on the location, so that I can, kind of think about how I would shoot there and how I would use the light that's available along with assessing to make the images that I want to make. So I think about it, in those terms. And so by the time I arrive at a location to do a shoot, I already know how the light is going to be and how it's going to change during the couple of hours that I'll spend there shooting. And then in terms of, like the style of the shoot, I do a little bit less planning in that regard. I usually leave it up to the model to decide what particular kind of style they would like to, have in terms of their outfits and so on and so forth. What I do though is I'll tell them what colors of clothing to avoid. So for instance, I don't like shooting models dressed in dark clothing sometimes because that'll kind of disappear. I like to shoot where the light's fairly low. And so I want clothes that are going to reflect back some light at me. So the planning mainly revolves around location and light, which is really what my photography kind of focuses on.
And in terms of your directorial style, obviously shooting on film, I'm not so sure about California, but in England, it would make you quite an anomaly for a model to be being photographed on film. Do you have to kind of go through that with them and sort of talk them through the slowness of the process? And are you someone that's quite intense with your directing, or are you quite laid back and see how things flow?
Well, you're obligated to give a certain amount of direction just to make the photo work. So I think, especially if I'm shooting medium format where you've got a low number of shots on a roll, and, the depth of field that I use tends to be very shallow. And I'm very focused on the way that the light needs to fall on the model, that I'm very precise in how I position them, which way I tell them to look. I'm very precise in how I position them. And I think a lot of models, if they're used to shooting with photographers who are just snapping away, furiously with a digital camera, they kind of move around a lot and stuff during the shoot. And I need to kind of slow them down in that regard and say, you need to basically stand in exactly this spot, face your body in exactly this direction, turn your face exactly, in this particular direction. And that's how we're going to take this photograph. So yeah, if they're not used to shooting with somebody who uses film and especially medium format film, then I kind of go through that. And I always explain that at the beginning of the shoot if it's somebody I haven't shot with before, that you kind of, tell them how the process works so that they'll understand why I'm doing things and why it's important for them to kind of closely adhere to the directions I'm giving them. Because, they could move their face, an inch in one direction and it totally spoils the way the light falls on their face, for instance. So I'm pretty precise in those regards with the directions that I give.
What's it like being a portrait photographer in LA? Because being one in Hampshire in England, it's not obviously going to be quite the same glamour and the same level of light and so on. So what is it like being in LA and being a portrait photographer?
Well, you know what? It's absolutely wonderful. It's wonderful for so many reasons. One is just a very practical reason, which is that we have really nice weather here, and the weather's nice all year round. So you're really not limited at all by weather as to when you can go out and shoot. You can shoot in the middle of, winter, and you'll still have, it'll be pleasantly warm. There'll be, in all likelihood, sunshine and so on. So the weather's lovely. The light is incredible. The light's actually too bright most of the time for me. So I have to, time the shoots either early morning or late afternoon. But when you hit those good times of the day, then the light is just stunning. Really beautiful light and just an abundance of it. So, I can plan a shoot, pretty much any day and know that I'm going to have, nice weather and nice light to work with. Another thing that's wonderful about shooting here is just the variety of environments that I've got to choose from. So, we've got the beaches, we've got the mountains, we've got just a huge variety of different kind of neighborhoods around the city. So I always actually wonder why anybody in LA would ever rent a studio, because it's so beautiful outside and there are so many different places you can go and shoot that it really seems a shame not to take full advantage of that. So that's another aspect of it. And then beyond that, there's, it's a great place because there's a lot of creative people here. There's a lot of actors and models that want the photographs taken. So I've just got a lot of people to work with. I'm from Hull originally in Yorkshire, and I'd have to imagine that if I was a photographer there, I'd struggle perhaps on all of those fronts to have the opportunities that I'm able to enjoy here. So definitely, it wasn't by design. I certainly wasn't. My living in Los Angeles has nothing to do with photography, but now that I've developed the love of of photography, then it turns out that I really am in a great place to do that.
How do you get on with your accent out there? Because obviously you've got that wonderful northern accent that in England we recognize so well, but I always worry about America. I travel over there about 4 times a year, and I find myself almost needing a translator depending on the state that I'm in. How do you get on with your accent?
It's a good question. I mean, I have to say that generally speaking, Americans have a very positive view of English accents. So I'd say it's a big advantage to me to have an English accent. People, think it indicates some level of sophistication, which may or may not be there, but it has that association for a lot of people here. I think even though I've still got my accent, what I had to do when I first moved here was to modify my vocabulary, because a lot of our words are different, of course. And it's not just the accent. Literally words mean different things or don't have any meaning over here. So I think I've adapted my vocabulary a little bit to the needs of living in the United States. But people can understand me, especially in LA. I mean, LA is a very diverse city. There's a lot of people from a lot of different places. So having an accent here isn't as remarkable as, say, if I go to somewhere like, Minnesota or Wisconsin or something like that, which is a couple of states that I've spent time in this country, where everybody remarks upon the fact that you have an accent. Whereas in LA, 70% of people in the city have got an accent of some variety. So it's not that surprising or unusual for people to hear a different accent when they're talking to somebody.
If we switch things up and talk about subjects that you photograph, what is it that makes a good model or a good portrait subject for you? What do they have to have in terms of like attitude and experience?
I mean, I think I work with models that have got a whole range of different kinds of experience. Some with literally no experience, and others who are professional models who are, have tremendous experience. And I think that what you've got to do, and obviously what they're able to bring to a shoot is different, or how comfortable they are with, looking into the camera, or how competently they're able to follow directions kind of varies depending on what their particular skill set and their experiences are. But I think that, I like to think that I can take a nice picture of anybody that I shoot with. And generally that's been the case. And one of the enjoyable things about shooting for me is just having that interaction with the person that I'm photographing to find kind of like the sweet spot of what works for them. And so, if it's somebody that's inexperienced, a lot of the time, I'll tell them how to stand, but then I'll just have a conversation with them, and I'll just take photographs during our conversation as I'm watching their face and their expressions, and I'll try and choose those kind of, or I'll try and capture those kind of decisive moment type expressions during our conversation, and then that will work. Whereas there's other models that I work with where you literally couldn't take a bad picture of them if you tried. They're constantly giving you a look that's going to look nice on a photograph.
I've always found models like that almost frustratingly good, in the sense of it becomes a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel, and it can be obviously it's amazing for the end product, but in the sense of getting the shot, you kind of almost feel like a passenger.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, although, I appreciate it because it means I come back with a bunch of good shots. So I'm never going to complain about working with a talented model, but and I think, and especially if you can tell the model what kind of emotion to display, and they're able to just turn that on, I think that's a tremendous skill. And I've worked with quite a lot of people who have that, or people who act as well for a living. They can be very good at that too, conveying a particular feeling or emotion as you photograph them, and that's always very helpful. But even for models that don't have that experience, you can still draw those expressions out of them, just through, conversation and a little bit of direction and so on. So that's one of the things I actually enjoy, is working with such a variety of skill sets and experiences and so on.
I mean, I wouldn't be English if I wasn't trying to dwell on the negative at least slightly. So you've talked about what makes for a good model. Are there any sort of traits that can be frustrating or difficult when it comes to a portrait subject?
Well, one of them would be not showing up on time when we're shooting in the morning, because, of course, the light is absolutely essential to my photography, as it is to everybody's. But I'm only working with available natural light. So if they're 20 minutes late, we've missed it, and it's not coming back. It's not coming back until the evening. And so that, being on time is a wonderful trait. Most of them are. Occasionally, somebody oversleeps or, doesn't calculate properly how long it's going to take them to arrive. So that's a very important trait. I think that, I think just a trait that I can't think of any negative things, quite honestly, Kris. I've had universally good experiences with my shoot, and I think because they're collaborations and because we both want to be there, I think that's always a great start. If we're there with the shared goal of getting some nice photographs, and it's always a positive thing.
In terms of the sort of creative control of a shoot, obviously you're quite meticulous in the way that you're planned out, and you've talked about being a little bit less invested in the styling and being a little bit more open to interpretation from the subject. But have you ever had ideas thrown at you that are just very far off of what you want to be doing, and you've had to kind of rein that in from the model?
Yeah, I mean, like cliched stuff. Like I've had a model say, I'm going to bring those twinkly lights, which were, they were popular on Instagram a couple of years ago, where people would wrap themselves up in twinkly lights. And I was just like, that's just, I'm open to your, creative suggestions, but I'm not going to go that far. So, I think there are certain places where I would draw the line. Instagram, is a good and a bad thing. And, and I rely upon it for my models, so I'm not going to complain about it too much. But there's a tremendous amount of cliched work on there that I have absolutely no interest in, replicating myself. So I want to avoid that. And I do have a particular style of portraiture, which is, I think fairly consistent. And I think that when people choose to shoot with me, then they know that that's basically, that sets the parameters, at least stylistically, for what we're going to be doing. We're not going to be doing something radically different to what they see in terms of the style that's shown on my Instagram account.
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there with one of my biggest pet peeves is kind of chasing trends and so on, but also talking about the consistency of your style. I'm someone that when I look at a new photographer, someone whose work I've not experienced before, if their portfolio is too varied and it's just kind of all over the place, I just instantly switch off. For the podcast and in terms of who I follow on Instagram, because I want to know what I'm getting when I sort of click follow or when I'm chasing down someone's work. But how important is that consistency to your sort of overall look, do you think? Do you think it's something that, is it a case that you're very settled on where you are and you're very happy with what you're getting and you're trying to sort of micro improve within that set? Or is it something where it's like you've been influenced to end up where you are?
Well, that's a really good question, because it's something that on the one hand, I like my consistency, right? But then on the other hand, I sometimes I'm a little bit critical of myself that I seem to be doing, kind of the same thing over and over. And hopefully I am, little by little, in those small increments improving as I keep doing broadly the same thing. I mean, none of my pictures are exactly the same, but there are things between them that are very, very consistent in terms of the way that I compose, for instance. I mean, that in particular, I have a very consistent method of composing portraits. So, I think that, for me, I think it's a strength when you present your work to have a consistent body of work. I sometimes wonder if I should be a little bit more varied just in terms of my own development as a photographer. And as I mentioned earlier, I do other kinds of photography. I don't post all of my photography on Instagram. So I do edit myself to present a fairly consistent look on my Instagram account. And for other stuff that I do, so for instance, for street photography, which wouldn't belong at all on my portrait account, I actually have a separate account, so I can kind of keep those different types of photography apart from one another. But the composition is consistent, and that's very deliberately so, because I like the way that I compose. I think it's a good way to do a portrait, and also because of the way that I came to think about portraits was very, very much influenced by kind of, like painters and such like of all like Renaissance painters and such like. So they had a very consistent way of composing their paintings, which I've, kind of adopted, and that I use to help me compose my photographs.
With film compared to digital, I feel like there's so much more personality to the actual camera, and that the camera has so much influence on the person using it. As a digital shooter, I use Sony, which has literally no personality whatsoever. It could not be more boring and irritating in its lack of inspiration. But with film photography, obviously the cameras carry so much personality. Do you ever feel like your influence, depending on the camera that you're using, will change the shot that you end up getting?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, to go back to the planning question, one of the things I didn't mention was, for me, an important part of the planning process is deciding, obviously, what kind of film I'm going to shoot, in terms of, the colors and the film speed and so on, but also, very importantly, what kind of camera I'm going to take with me, because I kind of have a bit of a weakness for buying cameras. And of course, with film cameras, they don't cost very much, by and large. So it's been easy for me to buy a bunch of them. And it really does matter for me which camera I'm going to take with me on a shoot. I take 3 cameras usually on each photo shoot, and just whatever, because that's the limit to what I can fit in my shoulder bag. But yes, I think about the kind of camera and the kind of lenses that I'm going to use very carefully, and it definitely affects the way that I shoot. So, for instance, if I'm shooting with like a twin lens reflex, for instance, I have a Mamiya C33 twin lens reflex camera. That's an entirely different kind of shoot to shooting with a Pentax 645 or something like that. And I try and choose a camera that's going to work well for me, and I'm going to enjoy shooting in the particular environment and for the kind of photos that I want to take on that occasion. Thinking about, lots of things, but usually how to best integrate the portrait with the environment that we're shooting, and which camera is going to enable me to do that. And then I also just enjoy the cameras, and so I'll just vary the cameras that I use because I enjoy using them. And like I say, I've got quite a collection, so I often look forward to opportunities to use cameras that maybe I haven't used for a little while, something like that. So that's an aspect of it that's enjoyable and important to me.
Something that I think a lot of digital photographers think about when they consider shooting film is just the potential mistakes, or you get a roll developed and there's nothing on it, the overexposure, underexposure, whatever. They worry because they haven't got that instant feedback about how they're going to do photographing on something that is so delayed in its gratification. Have you had any horror stories with film?
Well, actually not really. No, I think if you know how to take a photograph in terms of particularly how to expose a photograph, choosing the right shutter speed and so on, and you're confident that your camera works properly, then there's really no reason why you should be worried about the images that you're getting. I mean, literally the only kind of screw-ups that I've had have been my own faults when I've been developing film. So, for instance, before you put the developing liquid in the tank with the black and white film, you have to, with medium format, you have to give it a rinse with some cold water to wash off, some kind of coating that it's got on it. And I accidentally did that with hot water a few weeks ago and totally ruined the film.
Oh, no.
I thought it was the cold tap and it was the hot tap, and I poured hot water into the tank and just destroyed the film. I've had one occasion where I took a roll of film to a developing lab and they screwed it up, but that's literally like one roll ever. So yeah, really, it's, I understand the fear because you don't get that immediate confirmation that you've seen the picture, but it's really nothing to worry about. In my experience, at least, as long if I know that I took the picture right when I took it, because I know that I had the right shutter speed, the right aperture, and I could see through the viewfinder or on the focusing screen that it was focused properly and so on. So there's really there's really no reason to worry about it.
One thing that I'm quite fascinated by, and this is a little bit broad, so I'm kind of apologies for kind of moving away from talking literally about you, but just your view of something here. We have more photographers now than we've ever had in general. I'm not even including iPhones and whatnot, because we all know that's taking pictures. That's not photography. There's a very slight difference. There's more photographers now than there's ever been. It's been democratized to the nth degree, where anyone can go and pick up a camera and call themselves a photographer immediately. And thanks to that instant gratification, they can kind of get a camera to do roughly what they want it to do. Do you think we're seeing more great photographers come through as a result of that? Or do you just think that it's just watering down the general landscape of photography?
Gosh, I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I know that out of all of those, very many photographers that are out there taking pictures, and and especially we get to see everybody's work now because of social media, there are a lot of really good ones. Now, whether there's more really good ones than there used to be, I just don't know, because we never used to see everybody's film pictures back in the day, or really what anybody was doing prior to social media. I think it's great that it gives people the opportunity to do it. I mean, I would include myself in that. It was through picking up a DSLR that I was able to discover my love of photography. So, I think it certainly creates the opportunity for more people to become good photographers. It also means you've got to wade through a lot of mediocre photography people sometimes, because there's so many people doing it.
You mentioned something earlier that I feel like is a really important skill that gets massively overlooked, and that's the ability to kind of edit yourself and to curate what you're putting out, what you're making visible. And, one thing that I think a lot of up and coming photographers get wrong, a lot of developing photographers get wrong, is that they feel like every time they take a picture, it needs to be seen publicly. And sometimes it's a good idea to experiment with something, but maybe hold back until you've really got it refined in the way you want it. How do you learn that skill to edit yourself and to hold back on posting stuff?
Well, I just kind of learned it through it. I mean, I was the same. When I started, I just posted whatever I was shooting. And I kind of developed in that regard, or evolved by becoming a little bit more discerning and, kind of really finding my focus. I think first of all, you've actually got to decide what your focus is, or at least, find your way to it. I got there more just through, it kind of found me. That wasn't my original intention, but I just found more and more that my portraits were my better photographs, and that those were the ones that I enjoyed. And so I kind of honed it down through that, just that kind of learning process. But I think that one of the challenges when you're a new photographer is actually deciding what your style is, or what it is about your photography that distinguishes it from other people. Because I think that's the great wonder of photography, right? The camera only just takes a picture of whatever it is that's in front of it when you click the shutter. But within that, we're all able, or those of us who've got some experience in photography, are all able to develop somewhat unique views of the world, or distinct looks. And so you have to kind of find that a little bit by trial and error, I think. But once you have found it, you should be able to recognize what it is about your work that makes it distinctive, and only select, I think, if you have an Instagram account or a website or wherever you want to present your work, things that are consistent with that theme and kind of true to what your particular style is as a photographer. And that's going to cause people to, I think, have a better impression of your work than just a more scattershot approach. I tend to be very critical of myself. So let's say, I might shoot 5 rolls of film on a photo shoot, but I'm only going to post 1 or 2 of those. And I also try and avoid when I first get my pictures developed and I scan them, sometimes I love all of them, sometimes I don't like all of them. I think it takes a week or 2 sometimes to kind of let those emotions settle down, so you can kind of more objectively pick which are actually your good pictures, which you want to put out there, and not put out the lower quality images that are going to perhaps not best reflect what you accomplished during the shoot.
Well, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but since you brought it up, what is it that you think makes your images distinctive?
I think that they're distinctive in the way that I compose the subject relative to the background. So a lot in my photographs, every single, square inch of the image is deliberately composed. So even though I have the subject in focus and the background out of focus, I'm extremely attentive to the patterns in the background, be those the lines of buildings, the lines of streets, the angles of hillsides, or patterns of color, or patterns of light and shade. And I compose very precisely using those background elements. So even though they're in soft focus, they're all intended to contribute to the overall look of the image, and they're organized in a way that complements and enhances the in focus face area of the subject. So I think I do that perhaps a little more than others. There are people that also do that and who do it much better than I do. But though that's, I think, a little bit what makes my work stand out. I think that the way that I use light, again, it's not unique, but I'm very, very focused on light. So if I was to say what makes it distinctive, it's the combination of that composition and the way that I use light to accomplish the images. And maybe one other thing as well is the kinds of expressions that I like to capture in the photograph. So you'll notice if you look at the portraits on my Instagram feed, for instance, that there is a particular kind of gaze that the models have looking, and I want their gaze to connect with the viewer in a very distinctive way. That's something that when I've looked at paintings, for instance, when I've been trying to find inspiration, I've always been struck more by paintings where the subject in the painting feels like they're looking out of the painting at you as the viewer. And I try and accomplish that in my photography as well. So you'll see that there should be, hopefully, a feeling of eye contact with the subject when you look at one of my photographs. With rare exceptions, I sometimes take pictures where the model's not looking right in the camera, but that's another, at least a consistent feature of the way that I photograph.
Now, this is number 102 of the podcast, and I've asked this question of many portrait photographers, and no one's ever given me a particularly straight answer. I think it's a question that scares a lot of portrait photographers for a reason that's a little bit beyond me. But you're in sort of the absolute dead center of American celebrity culture, where you've got actors, you've got singers, you've got all sorts right on your doorstep where you are right now. If anybody in the world was to sort of, to quote the children here, slide into your DMs and ask for a portrait shoot, who would be your absolute dream subject?
I actually thought about you asking me that question because I had listened to some of your prior podcasts and I had heard you ask other people that, and I was like, oh my goodness, who would it be? And you're right, it's a difficult question. I actually don't know the answer to that. So I'm a bit of a letdown in terms of my response. I don't know who it would be. On the one hand, it would be nice to have someone who's got millions of Instagram followers to give my puny little account a boost. But in terms of, photographing a particular person, I don't know. I get so much enjoyment out of the photography that I already do. And that occurs irrespective of who the model is. Although obviously there's some that I particularly like working with just because they're nice people. But I just don't know the answer to that question, Kris. I'm sorry.
It's so funny, but I think I'm going to get to like number 250 before someone's going to come in with a direct answer. It's a very strange thing. I'll make it easier on you then. You talked about your love of different cameras. What's your dream camera that you don't currently own?
Oh, that I don't currently own? Gosh.
Yeah.
The problem is I actually do own the cameras that I want to own. My dream camera is a Pentax 6.7. That is to me the pinnacle of all cameras for portrait photography, and I've already got two of them. So I already have the best camera out there in my view. Maybe if I could choose another camera that I don't own, I would maybe get a Hasselblad or something, Hasselblad film camera. But I don't have a particularly burning desire to do that. the camera, I have 3 medium format cameras, all of which I absolutely love. I have Pentax 6.7, Mamiya C33, and a Pentax 645, and they're all just absolutely outstanding cameras. And for those particular formats, they do everything that I need. I mean, I know you could get like a Contax 645, which would be a great camera to have, and they're just insanely expensive. And I don't intend to own one because I don't feel that I need one. But I think that with those 3 cameras to shoot those 3 formats, 6x7, 6x6, and 6x4.5, those cameras are as good as it gets. And I don't particularly lust after any other cameras because I think I've got it covered with the ones that I already own.
All right, you did well to deflect that one as well. I'm a fan of your style. It's great. Let's sort of finish up here with a bit of self-analysis. What do you think your worst habit is as a photographer?
My worst habit is taking the same picture over and over again. I've got certain locations that I use, and one in particular that's near my house, where the hillsides kind of converge in such a beautiful way that it like perfectly frames a subject at sunset, and the light's perfect and everything. And I take too many pictures there. I've got to kind of mix it up a little bit and get out to more locations. And it's too easy sometimes for me to fall back on settings that I'm very, very familiar with. And I don't know why I do it. I do it because I know how well it works, and that we'll get nice images if we shoot there. But if I'm honest with myself, I need to get out there more and, mix it up a little bit. As I was saying earlier, LA is, it's a huge and varied city, and I still don't feel like I'm taking full advantage of it in my photography, because there are lots of places where I could be shooting where I know I'd get, great images that are different from the images that I've made thus far. And I'm not taking full advantage of that. So that's one thing I would like to do. And also just maybe just kind of break out of the constraints of my current style a little bit, and just be a bit more experimental and a little bit more, just try some different stuff. And I think that perhaps, one of the downsides of shooting with film a lot is because it's expensive, and because it's, you only get a certain number of shots and so on, it can actually limit your, desire to try new stuff, because you kind of want, you want to get tried and true images, and I need to be a little bit more experimental to, just broaden my horizons a little bit, I think.
It's been absolutely incredible to talk to you. I want to make sure, obviously, with the whole purpose of the podcast being for people to be able to find your work, where's the best place for them to go to see what you do?
Well, I have, it's really just on Instagram. My Instagram account is Hull is Beautiful, as in the city of Hull. And that's for my portrait work. And then for street photography, I have an account called Los Angeles is Beautiful. And so those are the only places where people can currently see my work. I don't have a website, but I do post work on those accounts fairly regularly, and that's a good place to find me.
So it's quite funny. Episode 32 was my first time speaking to an international guest. It came about as a result of the podcast. Obviously, you've got the limitations with lockdown. I couldn't have people come to the studio. So I started calling out, and then I decided to start calling beyond England, essentially. And I was so excited to have my first international podcast. And it was someone from Toronto who I didn't know until the call started that they are actually now based in Reading, which is about 20 minutes down the road from where I currently live. So I was bitterly disappointed to have my first international call be somewhere that I could have walked to, essentially. And on this occasion, I'm phoning out all the way to LA, and I've got this wonderful northern accent to speak to. So it's the great irony of life. You've been an absolute gentleman, and your work is incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Well, it's really been a pleasure, Kris, and thank you ever so much for having me on your podcast. I enjoyed it.
So hard to see.